Hello, everyone, all my friends around the world. I'm sitting here in my comfortable home, living in a very pleasant small city with access to walks in the countryside, just walking to walks. I have a lovely garden. I've been in lockdown for 2.5 months, and I've experienced virtually no hardship or no inconvenience, and certainly no hardship. I also know that others of you will have experienced challenging situations and times, and that many around the world will be suffering and will continue to suffer once lockdown is over. So I feel privileged for lots of reasons. I've had time to think about my topic and to see examples of, good examples of my topic of democratic leadership, and also not at all impressive and indeed very poor examples of democratic leadership. This topic is very close to my heart because social equality really is better for everyone, and I believe that democratic leadership is our main chance of managing and delivering that. It increases social interest. I will also look at how the COVID-19 pandemic is exposing and increasing social inequalities around the world and in some very wealthy countries. That part of that issue is that populism is putting democracy at risk and therefore social equality at risk. And I'll talk a bit about a recent white paper on that topic. Because populism raises certain kinds of issues about what it means to lead democratically, I ask the question, what is democratic leadership? And give some general ideas about that, so how it's defined generally, but also focusing on what democratic leadership needs to be, that is value-based and ethical, value-based in terms of a goal of social equality. And that is certainly chiming with an Adlerian perspective on democratic leadership. I'll also look at typically cited drawbacks of democratic leadership and see where that takes us. And where it took me was to look at leadership in extremis. So how do we manage some of the drawbacks at any time, but in particular, what can we learn from what people who've studied leadership in crisis have found? And indeed, we've got some examples right now as the COVID-19 pandemic is well underway. Looking after the leadership and extremist examples and guidance, I'm going back to the notion of, or to the issue of how populism is compromising or threatening democracy and democracies. So we ask the question, if people who head countries are not leading democratically in a kind of Adlerian sense, then what can we do to bolster democratic leadership against populism? And my final contribution will be looking at my own formulation or a framework that shows the systemic elements of democratic leadership and social equality, and actually breaks that down in a way that allows us to assess how we're doing in terms of leading democratically and where the blocks or the things that increase the likelihood of it falling apart, and where are the likelihoods that we can do it well what needs to be aligned, in other words. So Adler, on social equality, Adler recognized social equality as a fundamental prerequisite for the logic of social living. He said, without it, there can be no stability or social harmony. And I think we are recognizing and seeing that. That's a quote from Rudolf Dreikurs in his book, Social Equality, The Challenge of Today, written in 1971. Now quoting from Adler earlier, in 1913, Adler said, if he can abandon a dream of the world which was born of his vanity and which justifies his vanity, then more and more will it be possible for him to begin to feel himself an equal among equals, and less will he feel dependent on the opinions of others. I'm going to read that again because it's an important idea, and I've on the overhead I've put in he, she, and this time I'm just going to read it from the she. If she can abandon the dream of the world which was born of her vanity and which justifies her vanity, then more and more will it be possible for her to begin to feel herself an equal among equals, and less will she feel dependent on the opinions of others. And then another Adler statement from 1931, as soon as he or she can connect him or herself with his or her fellow humans on an equal and cooperative footing, he or she is cured. So I'd just like you, before I launch into the rest of my talk, to take a couple of moments to think about what Adler's notion of a successful democratic leader might be. So just think about it. Maybe think of some examples in your mind of a good democratic leader, of a successful democratic leader. Okay, well, if you said what I said, which is that that a democratic leader should really be furthering social equality, and that social equality increases social interest. So as a leader, if you show and demonstrate your social interest and your community feeling, then other people will feel like similarly generous towards others. And I like this quote from St. Thomas Aquinas, which was from the 13th century, when he observed something that I think we can all recognize, that generosity requires a modicum of plenty. Now, that modicum of plenty can be real material goods, like not having enough money to buy food, it can be very basic, or it can be feeling less than, less important than, less valuable than others. And what he's saying is that if we don't feel that, then we can't show our social interest. We can't be generous to others, which leads to some of the issues that are around in terms of the COVID-19 pandemic, which is exposing and increasing social inequalities, with phenomenally higher death rates among minority ethnic groups and poor members of society in both the US and the UK, two of the wealthiest countries in the world, and two countries that have the two countries that have the biggest gap, have been found to have the biggest gap between, in terms of the socioeconomic, basically economic status in the world. In other words, they are very poor examples of social equality in action within their societies. So epidemiological studies of health and well-being among the world's wealthiest communities, wealthiest countries, confirm Adler's insights about social equality being essential for human health and well-being. So Wilkinson and Pickett, two epidemiologists who've done massive studies using data sets from around the World Health Organization data, as well as within country data from all the wealthiest countries. So they're comparing wealthiest countries in order to see the effect of the gap between rich and poor, and looking at what they uncovered in their studies. You know, there was knowledge of this in well-being studies for some time, but they were the two researchers who identified that it was the gap between rich and poor that predicted whether people were experiencing positive health and well-being. And what they found was that the people in the countries with smaller gaps between rich and poor, that is the social democracies, showed that adult health, well-being, and mental health are better, that child well-being and educational achievement are higher, that social mobility is greater, that social problems like violence, homicide, and imprisonment are lower, that levels of trust are greater, that infant mortality is reduced, that life expectancy is increased, that interest in the welfare of others is demonstrated, and that concern for the environment and the future of the planet is greater. And that's in sharp contrast to what we find in the US and the UK. Okay, so populism is putting democracy at risk, and this work comes from Anna Gismawa-Boisi, who is a researcher at the Freeman Sploy Institute at Stanford University, and her colleagues there. They recently published, really just in the last couple of months, a white paper entitled Populism is Putting Democracy at Risk. So helpfully, they define populism as a political argument that pits ordinary people against a corrupt government elite, discrediting formal institutions and functions. And they can see that the weakness of mainstream political parties has essentially contributed to this problem. It's left democracies around the world vulnerable to populist influences, and in that way undermining institutions such as the courts, the legislatures, and regulatory agencies as creations of the corrupt elite, hollowing out formal institutions of liberal democracy. The populist influences redefine the people, often by excluding vulnerable ethnic or religious minorities, immigrants, and marginalized economic groups. The result is majority rule without minority rights. So here we've got a real seedbed of social inequality. And they also erode the informal norms of democracy. That is, they question the loyalty of the opposition and decry criticism as fake news. And rather than tolerating the free press and political opposition, they instead try to undermine its legitimacy. That brings me to a very important question. What do we mean by democratic leadership? Well, typically, and this is a kind of in general, the general knowledge or ideas about democratic leadership, it's participative or shared leadership. And it's characterized by group members actively taking part in the decision-making process. Organizationally, everyone is given the opportunity to participate, ideas are exchanged freely, and discussion is encouraged. The democratic process focuses on group equality and free flow of ideas, even though the leader or the leadership group is responsible for final decisions. Strong democratic leaders inspire trust and respect, as well as positive contributions within the group. Researchers have found that democratic leadership is the most effective approach and leads to greater productivity valuable contributions, and increased group morale across diverse organizations around the world. The most notable recent publication was a study of 9 different countries by Gagné and her colleagues, actually 19 different authors, so rather a democratic study of, as I say, organizations. And indeed, I guess I should say here that most of my work around democratic leadership has been concerned, applied in organizations and observed in organizations and studied in terms of organizations. However, our current situations really require, and certainly I have veered to look at a more systemic, a larger, a macro look at democratic leadership, which is what I'm going to be doing from now on. So democratic leadership is value-based and it's ethical. It promotes social equality, social inclusion, and transparency, and is central to being trusted and effective when in positions of power with responsibility for and to others. Whether as your leadership is as parent, as an educator, or a leader in health, or in mental health, or social care, or business, or the military, or law enforcement, or in government, or indeed internationally. It's relational, it's empathic, it's encouraging, and it's compassionate. It's socially responsible. It promotes social interest, community feeling, and consensus building. In other words, it isn't the simple vote. It's really, really working with people to look at the good of all, the good as far as it can be achieved. It's authoritative, that is, it's grounded in reality and offers friendly and firm boundaries that inspire, but also hold and contain ambition and anxiety. Now, I've written on both of those topics. I've published a book last year and an article this year offering Adlerian perspectives on democratic leadership. So both the last slide and this are from those works. So democratic leadership is inclusive and inspires shared vision, mission, values, and responsibility for cooperative and coordinated movement towards agreed upon improvements, goals, and outcomes. It requires building and maintaining respectful relationships, valuing all contributions. It involves listening to and supporting others in accepting and making the most of changes in circumstances and requirements, whether externally required, as with the COVID-19 pandemic, or consensually agreed to be desirable. And that could be more like, well, we need to improve the way we meet the needs of our constituency or our group. It's ethical and self-aware. So leaders, in this case, question themselves, ask for feedback on how they're doing. It's unselfish. It's not about the leader. It's about everyone involved. It's socially interested in those involved and those served. And it demonstrates humility in understanding and encouraging others towards achieving shared goals and outcomes. Like all human endeavors, democratic leadership is embedded in a wider social context and therefore is systemic. Okay, so there are some typically cited drawbacks of democratic leadership, and I think we can recognize these. I certainly hear them often. There's the one that there's poor decision making by unskilled groups, and that will be true if people aren't experienced in giving, sharing, and working through group views or group suggestions. Then it can take it may take a long time, or people get fed up and just decide willy-nilly. The second is that a minority and/or individual opinions are overlooked or overridden, so the stronger voices will sometimes overtake and disregard, and then voting, for example, will not include consensus or turning ourselves around and considering other views. That decisions take too long, and it's because decisions can take a long time that these other things happen, like communication breaking down in times of crisis. So it is also claimed that democratic leadership works best in situations where group members are skilled and eager to share their knowledge, that it is important to have plenty of time to allow people to contribute, develop a plan, and then vote or reach a consensus on the best course of action. And those are true. However, even in the work I do, putting in that time initially can create the trust in the process, which then helps you in times of crisis. Or as Adler, as Dreikurs reminded us, but there is no ill caused by democracy that cannot be cured by more democracy. In other words, we don't always get it right, and we need to work on it. We need to hear, to make sure that we do hear voices, and also that we develop people's capacity, that we support people to develop the capacity to make good decisions. So other areas of understanding effective leadership comes from studies of leadership in extremis, that is, leadership in crisis. And a recent, a March 2020 paper in the Harvard Business Review by Chris Nichols and his colleagues wrote the article called "4 Behaviors That Help Leaders Manage a Crisis." So I think these are quite good, really. And I think you'll notice that underpinning these actions is an assumption of positive democratic leadership. You see what you think. Action 1, decide with speed over precision. Focus on what matters most. Rapid change, cognitive overload, incomplete information, emotions run high, danger of paralysis are all swamping potentially the decision-making process. So whilst there's no time for consensus building in the usual way, you need to define priorities, make smart trade-offs, name decision makers, embrace action, and don't punish mistakes. Action 2, adapt boldly. Get and stay ahead of changes. Seek information from diverse sources. Admit what you don't know. Bring in outside expertise. Decide and publicize what not to do. Put projects that can wait on hold. Prioritize ruthlessly. Adjust quickly. Develop new plans. Strengthen, build direct connections with the front line. Create a network of local leaders and influencers with deep knowledge of issues and solutions. Action 3, reliably deliver. So there's accountability here. Take personal ownership of the crisis, even though you cannot control it. Align team focus. Create a culture of accountability. Monitor performance measures. And stay alert and aligned to the top 5 priorities and how they're being held and put forward. Daily review and share performance against those priorities, and adjust key indicators weekly. So try to get it right in terms of doing a proper assessment. Keep mind and body in shape. Keep your routine of self-care, good diet, exercise, meditation, relaxation, and stock up energy and shore up coping reserves. So all of these will be the things that those leading the action around the COVID-19 pandemic have been engaging in one, for well or not. So engage for impact, take care of the team, show understanding of their issues, find ways to motivate, communicate clearly and thoroughly new information, reiterate priorities. So connect with the team for a pulse check and to check on their issues and what's up with them. I've had a neighbor tell me that she's never been able to do anything so quickly within the National Health Service as since the COVID-19 crisis, because she's able to get the resources she needs and in a kind of cut through bureaucracy. So there's some learning there about when things are important. You can get them done. Ask for help. Engage the team to motivate them, but also ask for help from identified individuals or those who are in best place to help. Focus on both staff and clients with empathy, giving them material support, and collect and amplify positive messages and celebrate daily the unsung heroes. So those people who are doing the job and getting on with it and who need, and we all need that kind of feedback and appreciation. So showing appreciations in a way that we know as Adlerians is encouraging. So we look at some models of democratic leadership in the COVID-19 pandemic. We've got Angela Merkel, who's doing quite well, we think, in Germany. Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand has been impressive. Tsai Ing-wen, president of Taiwan, has been noted and seen to have been doing a really good job. Katrin Jakobdottir of Iceland has been impressive, and Erna Solberg in Norway. So how have they been impressive, these 5 women? Well, they've involved others and brought them on side. They've been clear, they have been transparent, they have accepted responsibility, they have accepted that mistakes get made, and they don't pretend to know what they don't know, but equally they take responsibility. So really an impressive group. And then there are a number of US governors who've been seen to do particularly good jobs and have hit the news. A couple like Andrew Cuomo, who is really quite impressive when you watch him. I mean, he certainly says what he doesn't know. He certainly apologizes. He certainly takes responsibility, but he's also, I guess, offended a few people, so he's a bit more controversial, as is Wanda Vasquez, possibly because, and I'll come to the notion of authenticity and integrity later, but perhaps Wanda Vasquez is wanting a bit in that regard. So carrying on with leadership in extremis, and these two these next 2 examples come from the military. So there's a psychologist, Professor Thomas Kollwitz, who was a former brigadier general and the founder of West Point's Leadership Center. He wrote a book called In Extremis Leadership, Leading as If Your Life Depended on It. And he identified patterns of traits, skills, and attitudes among leaders in life and death situations, or one could say among effective leaders in life and death situations. He says they possess inherent motivation for the task, that they embrace continuous learning, that they share risk with team members, that they adopt a lifestyle in common with team members, and that they're highly competent and inspire trust and loyalty in others. He had a summary statement, which was that optimism, hopefulness, and resiliency provide the key to understanding why leaders who are authentic are also effective as at commanding loyalty, obedience, admiration, and respect. In extremist leadership always comes with a tangible moral obligation. It is less about power over subordinates and more about an obligation toward their well-being and survival. The second example is Professor Patrick Sweeney, a social psychologist who's a retired Army colonel, And he wrote a chapter in a book about combat leadership, which is entitled Trust, the Key to Combat Leadership. In this study of leaders who could be trusted in actual combat during the Iraqi war, the top 10 attributes in order of importance were: 1, that they were competent; 2, that they were loyal; 3, that they were honest and demonstrated good integrity; 4, they lead by example; 5, they show self-control, self-management, or stress management and self-management; that they're confident and they inspire confidence; they're courageous, both physically and morally; that they share information; and that they make a personal connection with their subordinates; and they demonstrate a strong sense of duty. And a summary of that is that the leader's competence and courage referred to moral strength to do the right thing in all situations. That is, the strength of character to incur risk by acting in accordance with their beliefs and values, and to stand up to authority to protect the welfare of those to whom they are responsible. So we see that those leaders, we know that they wouldn't have been effective without, it takes, as we all know, it takes time to, for those in our teams or in our organizations to know us, to see us as competent, and to see us as people they can trust. So that takes time. And then in the extreme of the crisis situation, they're on our side, because we're on their side. And that is a very powerful element of good, strong, and democratic leadership. In times of peace, we have more time, and we need to take more time. But in times of crisis, we have to have earned our position and continue to inspire trust. So from that, let's turn back to populism and how we might bolster democratic leadership against populism, and back to the group Juzma Muya and her colleagues at Stanford University. So they concluded, to respond to populists, mainstream political parties need to use political rhetoric to mobilize voters and defend democratic institutions, attack electoral interference, and reclaim the rule of law. They need to engage in new coalitional politics that respond to voters and exclude anti-democratic forces, mutually policing each other. They need to commit to institutional reforms that improve the integrity of electoral competition by improving electoral security, depoliticizing election administration, and considering more ambitious choices such as ranked choice voting. Okay, so I said that I would look last at the framework that I developed between 2011 and probably today, when I changed the title slightly. But basically, it's as I said, it's a systemic or an ecosystemic model, which looks at various aspects, rather like Bronfenbrenner's ecological model, where we have the micro, the individual, the family, and the center, and then the community around that, with a larger the society, and then government around that, and one could say international government around that. So we have, in effect, an interrelationship, an indivisible system of how we achieve effective democratic leadership. And with a focus on social equality. So if we look at the top line, the government leads social values and asserts equality of worth and dignity. Society is responsible for community feeling and engagement. Community values include freedom of choice and scope for initiative within the community. That's how people find some significance. Individuals feel belonging and pleasure and pride in their belonging. We look at then social justice that the government leads, with the society being responsible for civic morality, community values including moral purpose, and individuals feeling, as a result, a sense of dignity and worth. The government leads on material security, social welfare, and responsibility, with society being responsible for mutual support and cooperation, with the community values being creatively encouraged, with a notion of pleasure and contribution, or ensuring pleasure and contribution, and individuals feel higher purpose in engagement. The last line, the government leads interrelatedness, the notion that we are all part of a much greater whole, indeed the cosmos or the universe, but certainly in our world, our climate, and other creatures. A connection to the cosmos is in a sense, society's responsibility. The community values a notion of some inner freedom. So if you like, how we make our connection is with our inner choice and freedom. And the individual feels that belonging by being part of humankind. And finally, I hope my notions of successful democratic, being what a successful democratic leader is, being one who demonstrates and promotes social equality and is mindful of the systemic elements of democratic leadership and social equality internationally, nationally, societally, and locally. I hope these chime with yours, but I also look forward to hearing your ideas soon, or at least when we meet at ICASSI in 2021. I'd love to hear from you and hear how you are, or hear any comments on the talk. And I wish you health, well-being, and creative ways forward after you come out of lockdown and return to however you want to return to life after COVID-19. Thank you very much.